I never thought Larry would actually leave. One minute we were fighting about Tyson, my best friend who I'd been secretly sleeping with for months, and the next minute Larry was packing his bags. I lied to Larry's face countless times. I used his money to fund hotel stays with Tyson. I faked anxiety attacks whenever Larry asked legitimate questions. I manipulated him into cutting off friends who warned him about me. When he finally found proof of my cheating and simply asked me to block Tyson, I laughed at him and called him insecure and pathetic. I thought he would apologize to me. Instead, he walked out that night without looking back. Now I'm alone while he's thriving with someone new. I never saw it coming. I still can't believe Larry actually left. Who does that? One minute we're arguing about Tyson, my best friend since forever, and the next minute he's throwing clothes in a suitcase like I'm the crazy one. I'm Valencia Morty, Val to everyone who knows me. This whole mess started 3 years ago at my cousin's backyard barbecue. Larry was this tall, quiet guy with thoughtful eyes watching me from across the yard. Not in a creepy way, just obviously into me. That night we talked until everyone else had gone inside, and 2 weeks later we were officially a thing. It was pretty good at first. Larry's the reliable type. Always on time, always remembers birthdays, always making sure the bills get paid. He works in logistics management, something with supply chains and inventory systems. Honestly, I zone out when he talks about it. The important thing is he has a stable job with benefits and he's good with money. Maybe too good sometimes, always wanting to check our budget before we do anything fun. Meanwhile, I work at this boutique marketing agency. Nothing fancy, but it pays enough for my car payment and going out on weekends. My boss thinks I'm inconsistent, but clients like me, and that's what matters. Tyson came into the picture way before Larry. We met freshman year of college when we got paired up for a project. He's the complete opposite of Larry. Spontaneous, always making me laugh, never worrying about tomorrow. He works these random consulting gigs that somehow pay really well but leave him with tons of free time. That's why he's always been my go-to person when I need to vent or just want to grab drinks after work. It's always been totally platonic. Well, mostly platonic. There was this one time during college and maybe a few times since then, but that's different. That's just blowing off steam between friends. Larry never had a problem with Tyson at first. He would even invite him over for game nights or ask about him like he genuinely cared. But then he started getting weird about it. Like when I was texting Tyson during our anniversary dinner, and Larry got all quiet and asked if it could wait. Or when I had to leave Larry's brother's wedding early because Tyson locked himself out of his apartment and needed my spare key. Larry didn't say anything then, but I could tell by his face he was annoyed. Things really changed after Larry got a promotion and had to work later. I started spending more time with Tyson, just as friends, obviously. Sometimes Tyson would come over to our place when Larry was working late, and we'd order takeout and watch movies. One time Larry came home early and found us sharing the couch under the same blanket. He didn't make a big deal about it then, but he started asking more questions about when I was seeing Tyson and why. I've been borrowing money from Larry for what I told him was car repairs, but really it was for this weekend trip Tyson and I took to check out a concert a few hours away. We got a hotel room with 2 beds, not that Larry would believe that. I kept telling Tyson we should post pictures, but he thought it was funnier to keep it between us. I guess that should have been my first clue that we weren't just hanging out anymore. Larry started checking my phone more often, not snooping exactly, but always being around when I got texts. I started keeping my phone face down and took it with me everywhere, even to the bathroom. It wasn't because I had anything to hide. Okay, maybe I did, but it wasn't serious, just some flirty texts and inside jokes Larry wouldn't understand anyway. I've been telling Larry I have anxiety attacks when he brings up legitimate concerns about where I've been or who I've been with. It works every time. He immediately backs off and apologizes for upsetting me. I know it's manipulative, but honestly, he's so clingy sometimes I need to create some space. Besides, is it really that bad if Tyson comes over for dinner sometimes, using groceries Larry paid for? We're all friends, right? At least that's what I keep telling Larry. The real problem started when Larry's sister saw me and Tyson at this restaurant downtown when I told Larry I was working late. She didn't say anything to him directly, but she started giving me these looks whenever we were at family events. Then last month, Larry started seeming distant, like he was gathering his thoughts or something. He started working out more and talking to his old college friends again, guys I'd convinced him were negative influences. I should have seen the warning signs that he was building a life that didn't revolve around me anymore, but I was too busy managing my time between him and Tyson to notice. Looking back, I guess I've been playing with fire. I didn't think Larry would ever actually leave, though. I thought he loved me too much. I thought I had him wrapped around my finger tight enough that he'd believe anything I said. I was wrong, and that night proved it. The weeks before everything blew up were getting tense. Larry was asking more questions, and honestly, keeping track of all my lies was becoming exhausting. I told him I was at a work conference when I was actually at a cabin with Tyson for the weekend. When he asked to see photos from the event, I had to quickly text coworkers to send me pictures. It's not my fault he's so suspicious. He's making me lie. Been telling Larry for months that his college friends don't really like him, especially Jake, who actually warned Larry about how I acted when he wasn't around. I convinced Larry that Jake was jealous of our relationship, and eventually Larry stopped hanging out with him altogether. It's better this way. His friends were always watching me too closely. Tyson comes over almost every time Larry works late. We're careful about not leaving evidence, but last month Larry found one of Tyson's earbuds between the couch cushions. I told Larry it must have fallen out during game night weeks ago, and he seemed to believe me, but I could tell he was connecting dots in his head. Larry discovered the dating app on my phone last Tuesday. I had the perfect excuse ready. I told him my single girlfriends and I were playing a game to see who could get the most matches in a night. He wanted to believe me so badly that he accepted it, even though I could see the doubt in his eyes. That's the thing about Larry. He's so desperate to trust me that he ignores what's right in front of him. I've started canceling plans with Larry last minute, especially when his family is involved. I can't stand another dinner with his mom asking about our future while his sister glares at me from across the table. Last weekend, I bailaid on his nephew's birthday party claiming a migraine, but posted a story at a bar with Tyson an hour later. I forgot Larry's cousin follows my private account. Stupid mistake. The real wake-up call should have been when Larry stopped arguing back. Instead of getting upset when I'd cancel plans or come home late, he just said okay and went about his business. I didn't realize he was detaching himself emotionally, preparing for an exit. I was too busy texting Tyson under the table during dinner or planning our next meetup to notice the shift in Larry's behavior. If I'd been paying attention, maybe I would have seen what was coming. Everything fell apart last Thursday. I was in the shower when a text came through on my phone. Larry saw Tyson's name flash on the screen with a message that said, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again tonight when Larry's at his meeting." I came out of the bathroom to find Larry sitting on our bed, my phone in his hand, completely still, like he was in shock. My first instinct was to go on the attack. I snatched my phone away and started yelling about privacy and trust. I told him checking my messages was controlling behavior and that he should be ashamed. I could see in his eyes he wasn't buying it this time, but I kept going because it had always worked before. When he stayed calm and asked me to explain the message, I tried telling him Tyson was talking about the help I gave him with a work presentation. Larry just stared at me, this empty look in his eyes I'd never seen before. That's when he pulled out his laptop and showed me the screenshots he'd been collecting for weeks. Hotel receipts from my email, location data showing I was nowhere near where I claimed to be, text messages between me and Tyson that I thought I'd deleted but had synced to our shared cloud storage. He had evidence of at least 7 different times I'd lied about being with Tyson. I felt cornered, but I wasn't going to admit anything. Instead, I turned it all around on him. I told him going through my digital footprint was psychotic behavior. I called him insecure and pathetic for tracking my movements. I said any normal man would trust his girlfriend without needing proof. With each accusation, I expected him to apologize like he always did, to doubt himself and beg for forgiveness for suspecting me. But something had changed in Larry. He just looked at me with this calm I'd never seen before and said, "I don't need you to admit anything. I already know everything I need to know." Then he asked me to block Tyson on all platforms if I wanted our relationship to continue. He said it was a first step toward rebuilding trust. I laughed in his face. Who did he think he was to give me ultimatums? I told him I wouldn't block my best friend just because he was too insecure to handle our friendship. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Without another word, Larry walked over to our closet and pulled out a suitcase, one I didn't even know we owned. At first, I thought he was bluffing, trying to scare me into apologizing. I kept talking, telling him he was overreacting, that he was being childish, but he didn't respond. He just methodically folded his clothes and placed them in the suitcase. I switched tactics. I started crying, telling him I was sorry if I'd hurt him, that we could work through this. He didn't even look up. I tried getting angry again, telling him this just proved how controlling he really was. Nothing. He just kept packing like I wasn't even there. I was frantically texting Tyson updates throughout this whole thing. I couldn't believe Larry was actually going through with it. When the suitcase was full, he started gathering his personal items. His laptop, his watch collection, the books on his nightstand. It was like watching someone erase themselves from my life in real time. The reality of the situation finally hit me. He was actually leaving. I grabbed his arm, promising I'd block Tyson right then if he would just stop packing, but it was too late. He gently removed my hand and said he deserved someone who actually loved him. As he zipped up the suitcase, a text from Tyson lit up my phone screen. It said, "Did the idiot buy your story?" Larry saw it before I could grab my phone. Any doubt he might have had vanished in that moment. The look on his face, I'll never forget it. Not anger, just clarity, like he was finally seeing the truth after years of looking through a fog. He picked up his suitcase and walked toward the door. I followed him, alternating between threats and pleas. I told him he would regret this, that he would never find anyone who understood him like I did. I told him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. When none of that worked, I broke down sobbing, clinging to his arm, begging him not to leave me. The days after Larry left were a weird blur. I kept expecting him to text, to call, to show up at the door apologizing for overreacting. He didn't. I tried calling him dozens of times but discovered he'd blocked my number. I sent emails that went unanswered. I even showed up at his workplace, but security wouldn't let me in. Apparently, he warned them I might come. It was humiliating. Tyson came over that first night, and I thought having him there would make me feel better, but something felt off. Without the sneaking around, without the thrill of hiding our connection from Larry, the whole thing felt hollow. Tyson spent the entire time checking his phone and left early, claiming he had work in the morning. It was the first time I wondered if maybe Tyson wasn't as invested in me as I thought. I started noticing how quiet the apartment was without Larry. No one making coffee in the morning. No one asking about my day when I got home. The bills started piling up, too. I hadn't realized how much Larry had been subsidizing my lifestyle until I had to cover everything myself. Tyson never offered to help, even when I hinted at my financial stress. Our mutual friends started acting weird around me. Katie, who I thought was my closest girlfriend, stopped returning my texts. When I finally cornered her at a coffee shop, she admitted Larry had shown her and some others the evidence he'd collected. "I just can't believe you would do that to him," she said. "He adored you." I tried explaining my side, but even to my own ears, my excuses sounded pathetic. The worst part came when Tyson started getting distant. His texts became less frequent, his excuses more common. 3 weeks after Larry left, I went to surprise Tyson at his apartment and found him with another woman. When I confronted him, he just shrugged and said, "We were never exclusive, Val. I thought you understood that." All this time, I thought I was juggling two men who were crazy about me, but it turns out I was just another conquest for Tyson. My first weekend completely alone in the apartment was when reality really sank in. I found myself staring at Larry's empty side of the closet, the bathroom counter where his electric razor used to sit, the empty space on the bookshelf where his stupid supply chain management books had been. I kept waiting for my phone to light up with his name, even though I knew he'd blocked me. I tried reaching out through his sister, thinking she might take pity on me, but she just read my message and never responded. I even drove by his parents' house, thinking he might be staying there, but his mom saw me from the window and closed the curtains. Word had obviously gotten around. At work, I started slipping. My focus was shot. Clients were complaining about missed deadlines, and my boss pulled me aside to ask what was going on. I tried playing it off as just having a rough patch, but she wasn't buying it. "You need to get it together, Valencia," she said. "Your personal drama is affecting your work, and we can't afford to lose clients because you're distracted." I wanted to defend myself, but what could I say? That I'd been caught cheating on my boyfriend and was shocked he'd had the self-respect to leave. That I'd spent so much time maintaining my web of lies that I'd forgot how to function without it. By the 1-month mark, I was behind on rent. The landlord sent a formal notice. I called my parents, humiliated, and asked for a loan. My mom wanted to know what happened to the money Larry used to contribute. "We broke up," I said, keeping it vague. "What did you do?" she asked immediately. "Why do you assume I did something?" I snapped. The silence on the other end told me everything. Even my own mother knew I was the problem. She sent the money anyway with a note saying, "Figure out what you want, Val. You can't keep living like this." I decided to try making things work with Tyson after all. Maybe if he knew Larry was completely out of the picture, he'd want something more serious. I started calling him more, suggesting plans, trying to lock down actual dates instead of last-minute hookups. He played along at first, but I could feel him pulling away. "Don't take this the wrong way," he said one night after I'd been especially clingy, "but I'm not looking for anything serious right now." I thought we were on the same page with that. "We were," I lied. "I just thought maybe we could spend more time together since I have more free time now." "Yeah, about that," he said, checking his phone for the third time in 5 minutes. "I'm actually going to be pretty busy with work for the next few weeks." I knew a brush off when I heard one. Tyson had been fun when I was with Larry because I was unavailable. Now that I was single and clearly interested, he was backing away. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 months after Larry left, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw a photo that made my stomach drop. It was Tyson with his arm around a woman I'd never seen before. The caption read, "Finally making it official with this one." The date on the post showed it was from a week before Larry had found that text on my phone. So, while I'd been sneaking around with Tyson behind Larry's back, Tyson had been seeing this other woman too. I felt sick. Not just because Tyson had played me, but because I'd thrown away something real with Larry for someone who never cared about me at all. I sent Tyson an angry text, demanding an explanation. His response was infuriatingly casual. "I never promised you anything, Val. We had fun, but you were with Larry, remember? I didn't think you wanted anything serious with me." When I pointed out that he'd been seeing someone else while hooking up with me, he just said, "That's different." Melissa and I were taking it slow. I wasn't cheating on anyone. The mental gymnastics were impressive. Somehow in his mind, I was the only bad person in this scenario. I blocked him after that conversation, something I should have done when Larry asked me to. By the 3rd month, I was struggling to keep up with bills and started looking for a roommate. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd gone from a stable relationship with someone who helped support me to interviewing strangers to share my space just to make rent. The first few candidates took one look at the apartment and never called back. I realized I'd let the place fall apart without Larry's constant tidying. I finally found a roommate, a quiet grad student named Ava who was barely home. She paid her share on time and kept to herself, which should have been perfect. But it just emphasized how alone I really was. I tried dating apps, thinking I could find someone new, someone like Larry, but who wouldn't ask so many questions. The guys I matched with were either looking for hookups or saw through my fake cheerfulness. One date told me straight up that I seemed like I was still hung up on someone else, and maybe should take some time to figure things out before dating again. Around the 4-month mark, I heard through a mutual friend that Larry had been promoted again. He was apparently thriving at work, had moved into a nicer apartment downtown, and had started taking these rock climbing classes he'd always talked about but I dismissed as boring. The friend quickly changed the subject when they realized they'd said too much, but the damage was done. Larry wasn't just surviving without me, he was doing better. I made the mistake of looking him up on LinkedIn, where his profile picture showed him smiling confidently in a suit I'd never seen before. There was a woman tagged in one of his recent posts, a colleague congratulating him on his promotion. She was pretty in an understated way, with kind eyes and a warm smile. The comments were full of inside jokes and gentle teasing. I recognized her name, Jennifer, from accounting. She'd come up in conversation a few times during our relationship, always as just a work friend. I wondered if something had been going on between them while we were together. The thought made me irrationally angry. How dare he accuse me of cheating if he'd been doing the same thing? But deep down, I knew better. Larry wasn't like that. If he said Jennifer was just a friend back then, she was just a friend. The fact that they might be something more now wasn't hypocrisy. It was just life moving on. 5 months after Larry left, I ran into his best friend Chris at the grocery store. I tried to duck down another aisle, but he saw me and to my surprise came over to say hello. He was polite but distant, asking generic questions about how I was doing. I couldn't help myself, I had to ask about Larry. He's good, Chris said carefully. Really good, actually. Is he seeing someone? I blurted out. Chris looked uncomfortable. I don't think you get to ask that question anymore, Val. I just want to know if he's happy, I lied. He is, Chris said firmly. Happier than I've seen him in a long time. That stung more than I expected. Before I could stop myself, I asked, does he ever mention me? Chris gave me a look that was somewhere between pity and disgust. No, Val, he doesn't. I wanted to ask more, but Chris made an excuse about being late for something and walked away, leaving me standing in the cereal aisle fighting back tears. That night, I found myself scrolling through old photos of Larry and me. There we were at his company picnic, at my cousin's wedding, hiking that trail he'd insisted would be worth the early wake-up. In every picture, he was looking at me with such open adoration while I was often looking at the camera or, worse, checking my phone. Had I ever really seen him? Had I ever appreciated what I had? 6 months to the day after Larry left, I was coming home from work when I saw him. He was getting out of his car across the street, helping that woman Jennifer with her coat. Our old apartment was on the way to a popular restaurant district, so it made sense they might be passing through. They were laughing about something, completely caught up in each other when he happened to glance up and saw me. Our eyes met across the street. For a moment, everything froze. I waited for some flicker of pain or longing or regret to cross his face. There was nothing. Just a brief flash of recognition, a slight stiffening of his shoulders, and then he deliberately turned away, guiding Jennifer toward the restaurant with his hand on the small of her back. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He didn't acknowledge me beyond that initial glance. It was as if I was a stranger, someone he might have passed on the street 1,000 times without noticing. I stood there watching them walk away, waiting for him to look back. He never did. That night, I found myself creating a new dating profile, carefully selecting photos that made me look fun and carefree. I matched with a guy named Daniel who seemed nice enough, steady job, decent sense of humor, not too many questions. We arranged to meet for drinks that weekend. When I got to the bar, Daniel was already there, waiting with a drink for me. He was polite, asked about my job, shared some funny story about his coworkers. He was perfectly fine. But as the night went on, I found myself cataloging all the ways he wasn't Larry. He didn't listen as intently. He interrupted me a few times. He checked his phone more than Larry ever would have during a date. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. What was I doing? Starting the same pattern all over again with someone new. I could already see myself getting bored with Daniel, looking for excitement elsewhere, telling the same lies, playing the same games. I went back to the table and finished the date. But when Daniel suggested a second meetup, I told him I wasn't ready. It might have been the first honest thing I'd said in months. Walking home alone that night, I allowed myself to really think about what had happened with Larry. Not my usual spin where I was the victim of his insecurity, but the truth. I had systematically lied to and manipulated someone who loved me. I had gaslit him when he raised legitimate concerns. I had prioritized cheap thrills with Tyson over a real connection with Larry. And when given a chance to save the relationship, I had laughed in his face and called him pathetic for having boundaries. The realization didn't transform me overnight. I didn't suddenly become a better person or feel cleansed by my moment of self-awareness. But it was a start, a tiny crack in the wall of self-deception I'd built around myself. For the first time since Larry left, I admitted to myself that I was the villain in this story. Not Larry with his insecurity, not Tyson with his casual disregard, but me. I had done this. I had blown up my life and hurt someone who deserved better. I considered reaching out to Larry with an apology, but what would be the point? He had moved on. He was happy. An apology now would just be another selfish act, trying to ease my guilt rather than actually making amends. The best thing I could do for Larry was to leave him alone. That night, I deleted my dating apps and sat down with my neglected budget. If I was going to start over, really start over, I needed to get my life in order first. No more looking for someone else to fix my problems or fund my lifestyle. No more running from reality into the arms of the next distraction. It wouldn't be easy. I had a lot of habits to break, a lot of patterns to change. But watching Larry walk away without looking back had shown me one thing for certain: I couldn't keep living this way. Something had to change, and that something was me. 1 month after my moment of clarity, I'd love to say I was a completely changed person. That would be a lie, and I'm trying to be more honest these days. The truth is, changing long-established patterns is harder than those inspirational Instagram posts make it seem. I did make some progress. I stuck to my budget. I started cooking at home instead of ordering takeout. I even joined a kickboxing class to help manage my stress. But old habits die hard, and the loneliness was getting to me. I found myself thinking about Larry more often than I'd admit. Not just missing the financial stability he provided, but missing him. The way he'd bring me coffee in bed on Sundays. How he remembered every story I told him, even the small ones. How safe I felt falling asleep next to him. My roommate Ava caught me crying one night while scrolling through old photos. Instead of the judgment I expected, she sat down beside me. "Want to talk about it?" she asked. I surprised myself by telling her everything. The cheating, the lies, the gaslighting, all of it. I expected her to get up and walk away in disgust, but she just listened. "That's a lot to process," she said when I finished. "But recognizing what you did wrong is the first step to not repeating those mistakes." "I don't know if I can change," I admitted. "What if this is just who I am?" "Nobody is just one thing," she said. "We're all capable of growth." Her words stayed with me. Maybe I could change, even if it was just in small ways. Maybe I could learn to be more honest, more considerate, more aware of how my actions affected others. The next day, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I called my mother and told her the truth about what happened with Larry. Not my usual edited version where I was the wronged party, but the real story. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. "I'm disappointed, Valencia," she finally said. "But I'm proud of you for telling me the truth." "I don't know what to do now," I confessed. "You live with the consequences," she said simply. "And you work on becoming someone who wouldn't make those same choices again." It wasn't the warm comfort I wanted, but it was what I needed to hear. 7 months after Larry left, I was grocery shopping when I ran into his sister Megan. My first instinct was to hide behind the cereal display, but she spotted me before I could escape. "Val," she said coolly. "Hi, Megan," I managed. "How are you?" "I'm fine," she replied, clearly not interested in small talk. "How are you doing?" There was something in her tone that wasn't entirely hostile. Not friendly, but not as cold as I expected. "I'm okay," I said. "Working on some things," she nodded, seeming to understand what I meant. "That's good to hear." An awkward silence fell between us. I knew I should just say goodbye and walk away, but something made me stay. "How's Larry?" I asked, immediately regretting it. Megan studied me for a moment like she was deciding how much to share. He's good, really good actually. That's good, I said lamely. He's seeing someone, she added, watching my reaction. Jennifer, they're pretty serious. I tried to keep my face neutral, but something must have shown because her expression softened slightly. He deserves to be happy, Val. I know, I said and meant it. He does. Another silence fell. I shifted uncomfortably. I'm sorry, I blurted out. For everything, I know that doesn't change anything, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I regret what I did, to Larry, to your family. Megan looked surprised. Thank you for saying that. We stood there among the breakfast cereals, two people connected by someone who was no longer in my life. Then Megan gave me a small nod and pushed her cart past mine. Take care of yourself, Val, she said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. A small acknowledgement that maybe I wasn't beyond redemption. 8 months after Larry left, I was promoted at work. My boss called me into her office, and I was sure I was about to be fired for my inconsistent performance over the past few months. Instead, she told me she was impressed with how I'd turned things around. You've shown real growth, Valencia, she said. Your clients have noticed too. You're more focused, more reliable. I almost cried right there in her office. It had been so long since anyone had seen something good in me. The promotion came with a raise, enough that I could finally stop stressing about making rent each month. I celebrated by taking Ava out to dinner, my treat. It felt good to be the one treating someone else for a change. 9 months after Larry left, Tyson texted me out of the blue. His relationship with the Instagram girl had crashed and burned, and he was looking for comfort in familiar places. My thumbs hovered over the screen, muscle memory, ready to respond with something flirty. Instead, I blocked his number. It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. Tyson represented a version of myself I was trying to leave behind. The easy lies, the thrill of deception, the selfishness disguised as spontaneity. I didn't want to be that person anymore. Around the same time, I started seeing a therapist. I'd resisted the idea for months, telling myself I wasn't that messed up. But after a particularly rough night when I found myself slipping into old patterns of thinking, blaming everyone but myself for my problems, I knew I needed help, doctor. Chen didn't judge me when I told her about Larry and Tyson and all the lies. She just asked thoughtful questions that made me really examine my behavior. What do you think you struggled with monogamy? She asked during one session. I didn't think I was struggling, I said defensively. Tyson was just fun. Larry was so serious all the time. But you chose to be in an exclusive relationship with Larry, she pointed out. No one forced you to make that commitment. I didn't have a good answer for that. I'd never really thought about why I cheated beyond the surface level excuses I'd given myself. Tyson was exciting. Larry was boring sometimes. I wanted attention, but Dr. Chen pushed me to go deeper. What were you afraid of? She asked. Afraid of? I repeated, confused. Often when we sabotage good relationships, it's because we're afraid of something. The question stuck with me long after our session ended. What was I afraid of? Boredom, commitment, or maybe it was something deeper. Maybe I was afraid of being truly known, truly vulnerable with someone. If Larry really knew me, really saw me, would he still love me? It had been easier to keep him at a distance, to maintain the upper hand, to have Tyson as a backup plan. 10 months after Larry left, I went on a real date. Not a hookup pretending to be a date, not a scheme to find someone to take care of me, but an actual date with a guy named Eli who worked at the coffee shop I frequented. He was cute and funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Over dinner, I found myself having to consciously resist the urge to embellish stories or present a more exciting version of myself. It was harder than I expected, this commitment to honesty. I'd gotten so used to performing, to being whoever I thought the other person wanted me to be. Sorry, I'm a little nervous, I admitted when I caught myself rambling about my job, making it sound much more glamorous than it was. That makes two of us, Eli said with a smile. First dates are weird, right? Like a job interview but with food. His honesty made it easier for me to relax, to just be myself without all the calculation and performance. We had a nice time, and when he walked me home, he didn't push for more than a good night kiss. We made plans to see each other again that weekend. 11 months after Larry left, I was having coffee with Katie, one of the friends who had distanced herself after learning what I'd done. We'd gradually reconnected over the past few months, starting with awkward small talk and building back toward something resembling our old friendship. I saw Larry last week, she said casually. At Jennifer's birthday party. My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice neutral. How is he? Happy, she said, watching me carefully. He and Jennifer are moving in together. The news hit me harder than I expected. It was one thing to know Larry had moved on, another to hear he was building a life with someone else, the kind of life he'd once planned with me. That's great, I managed. I'm glad he's happy. Katie reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You okay? I took a deep breath. Not really, but I will be. We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. You know, I didn't think you'd ever actually acknowledge what you did. I thought you'd just keep spinning it to make yourself the victim somehow. I got tired of lying, I said. Especially to myself, Katie nodded. I can see that, you seem different. I'm trying to be, I said. 1 year after Larry walked out, I found myself standing outside our old apartment building. I hadn't planned to come here, but my feet carried me to this spot on their own. So much had changed in a year. I had changed. I thought about the night Larry left, how confused I'd been that he wouldn't accept my excuses, how entitled I'd felt to his forgiveness. I thought about all the signs I'd missed or ignored, all the chances I'd had to be honest, to be better. A year ago, I would have found a way to blame everyone but myself for what happened. Larry was too insecure. Tyson led me on. Society puts too much pressure on monogamy. Now I could finally admit the simple truth. I had made selfish choices that hurt someone who loved me, and I was living with the consequences. I wasn't transformed into a saint. I still had bad days when old habits resurfaced. I still sometimes caught myself crafting a convenient lie instead of a difficult truth. But I was trying, really trying to be more honest, more accountable, more aware of how my actions affected others. Ellie and I were still dating. It was too soon to know if it would last, but it was different from any relationship I'd had before. I was more honest with him than I'd ever been with Larry, even about the ugly parts of myself. And strangely, being honest made me feel closer to him, not more vulnerable or exposed as I'd feared. As I stood looking up at the windows of my old apartment, I didn't wish for Larry back. That chapter was closed, and rightly so. What I wished for was the chance to tell him I was sorry, truly sorry, without any expectation of forgiveness or reconciliation. Just an acknowledgement of the pain I'd caused and the lessons I'd learned too late. But that wasn't going to happen, and maybe that was part of my penance. Living with the knowledge that some damage can't be undone, some bridges stay burned, some people are right to keep their distance. I took one last look at the building before turning away. I wouldn't come back here again. It was time to stop dwelling on what I'd lost and focus on becoming someone who wouldn't make the same mistakes. I wasn't there yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time in my life, I was genuinely trying. As I walked away, my phone buzzed with a text from Eli. Still on for dinner tonight? I smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. I put my phone away and kept walking, leaving the past behind one step at a time. 2 years after Larry left, I was at a completely different place in my life. The marketing agency had downsized, and I'd lost my job. Instead of panicking or looking for someone to bail me out, I'd used my savings to take some coding classes and landed a job at a small tech startup. The work was challenging, but I was proud of how I'd handled the setback. Lee and I were still together. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but the foundation of honesty we'd built made even the hard conversations manageable. I told him about my history with Larry early on, not the sanitized version, but the real one where I was the villain of the story. Instead of running for the hills, he'd appreciated my candor. Everyone has a past, he'd said. What matters is what you do with the lessons it taught you. We'd moved in together 6 months ago, an experience that brought up unexpected emotions. Sharing space with someone meant being seen in all your moods, all your habits, all your flaws. There was no hiding, no performing, no maintaining a perfect image. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. I still thought about Larry sometimes, but less often and with less anguish. I hoped he was happy with Jennifer. I hoped he'd found what he deserved. I was at a coffee shop near my new office when it happened. I was waiting for my order when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Val, I turned around and there he was. Larry. He looked good, more confident, more relaxed than I remembered. He was dressed for work in a crisp button-down and slacks, a leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. Larry, I managed, my voice catching. Hi, an awkward silence fell between us. 2 years of imagined conversations, and now that he was standing in front of me, I couldn't find the words. How have you been? He asked. His tone was polite but distant, the way you'd speak to an old acquaintance, not someone you once planned a future with. Good, I said, then corrected myself. Better, I've been getting better. He nodded, and I couldn't read his expression. Was he skeptical, indifferent? I couldn't tell. I heard you're with Jennifer now, I said. I'm happy for you. A small smile crossed his face at the mention of her name. Thanks, we got engaged last month. The news hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Congratulations, that's wonderful. Another silence fell. The barista called my name and I gratefully took my coffee, giving myself a moment to compose myself. I should get going, Larry said, glancing at his watch. I have a meeting. Of course, I said quickly. It was good to see you. He turned to go, and suddenly I couldn't let him leave without saying what I'd wanted to say for 2 years. Larry, wait. He paused, looking back at me with a guarded expression. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. What I did to you was inexcusable, and you deserved so much better. He studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself to meet his gaze, to not look away from the pain I'd caused. Thank you for saying that, he said finally. I appreciate it. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without my voice breaking. Take care of yourself, Val, he said, and then he was gone, the bell over the door jingling as it closed behind him. I stood there clutching my coffee, tears threatening to spill over. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation or emotional reconciliation I'd sometimes imagined. It was brief, awkward, anticlimactic, but it was closure of a sort. I'd finally been able to apologize directly, without excuses or expectations. And while he hadn't offered forgiveness, he had heard me. Maybe that was all I could hope for. That night I told Eli about running into Larry. He listened attentively, holding my hand across the dinner table. How do you feel about it? He asked when I finished. Sad, I admitted. Relieved, a little bit of both. That makes sense, he said. It's a lot to process. I think I've been holding on to this idea that someday I'd get a chance to make things right, I said. But I'm realizing there is no making it right. Some damage can't be undone. The best I can do is learn from it and try to be better going forward. Eli squeezed my hand. That's all any of us can do. Later that night, as Eli slept beside me, I thought about the journey of the past 2 years. The pain, the growth, the slow rebuilding of myself into someone I could actually respect. I wasn't there yet, there was still plenty of work to do, but I was on the right path. I thought about the night Larry packed his bag and walked out the door. At the time, it had felt like the end of my world. Now I understood it had been the beginning of something important, my reckoning with myself. If he had stayed, if he had forgiven me too easily, I might never have been forced to face the truth about who I was and what I was capable of. His leaving hadn't been a rejection. It had been an act of self-respect that, in time, had taught me something about respecting myself and others. It had been the wake-up call I didn't know I needed. 3 years after Larry left me, I was on my lunch break, scrolling through social media when a photo stopped me cold. It was Larry and Jennifer beaming at the camera, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. The caption read, "Introducing the newest member of our family, Sophia Grace, born yesterday at 8:04 a.m." I stared at the image, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. Larry was a father now. He had the family he'd always wanted, the future we had once vaguely discussed on lazy Sunday mornings. But not with me. Never with me. I closed the app and set my phone down, taking a deep breath. 3 years ago, this news would have sent me into a spiral of jealousy and self-pity. Today, I felt a bittersweet happiness for him. He deserved this joy, this family, this love. And in a strange way, I was grateful that my betrayal had freed him to find it with someone worthy of his trust. I didn't comment on the post or send a message. Some connections are better left in the past. But I did make a small donation to a children's charity in Sophia's name that evening. It felt like the right thing to do, a quiet acknowledgement of a life that had once been intertwined with mine, now moving forward on its separate path. That night, as Eli and I walked home from dinner, hand in hand under the stars, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. My story with Larry had ended badly, as it deserved to. But it had also taught me the hardest and most important lesson of my life, that integrity matters, that honesty isn't optional in real relationships, that the person you become when no one is watching is who you really are. I wasn't that selfish, manipulative girl anymore. I had grown, changed, learned. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. And while I couldn't undo the pain I'd caused in the past, I could ensure I didn't inflict the same wounds in my future. As Eli and I reached our building, he pulled me close for a kiss under the streetlight. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "You've been quiet tonight." I considered evading the question, giving some light answer that wouldn't dampen the mood. Old habits die hard. But then I took a deep breath and told him the truth. "I was thinking about mistakes and growth and second chances," I said, "and how grateful I am for this life we're building." He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "Me too." We went upstairs to our apartment, to our shared life built on honesty and respect. It wasn't always easy or comfortable being truthful, being vulnerable, being seen. But it was real in a way my relationship with Larry never had been, because back then I hadn't been real. The night Larry packed his bags and walked out that door was the beginning of my real story. Not a convenient narrative where I was the heroine wronged by an insecure boyfriend, but a messy, painful journey of facing my own flaws and choosing, day by day, to be better. I still had bad days. I still sometimes caught myself reaching for a convenient lie or trying to manipulate a situation to my advantage. Old patterns don't disappear overnight or even over years. But now I recognized those impulses for what they were and made a conscious choice to resist them. That was the real difference between the Valencia who laughed in Larry's face when he asked her to block Tyson and the Valencia who now stood in her kitchen making tea, content with her honest life. Not perfection, but awareness. Not flawlessness, but accountability. Larry had moved on to his happily ever after. And slowly, imperfectly, I was building mine too, not despite the mistakes of my past, but because of what they had taught me. Some lessons come at a higher price than others. Mine had cost me a good man's love and trust, but in losing Larry I had found myself. And in finding myself, my real self, not the carefully constructed persona I'd hidden behind, I had gained something even more valuable than what I'd lost. I had gained the chance to become someone new. Someone better. Someone who could look in the mirror each morning and feel, if not pride, then at least peace with the person looking back. 5 years after Larry left, I was sitting at my desk in my home office when an email notification popped up on my screen. The sender's name made my heart skip, Lawrence Matthews. I stared at it for a full minute before finding the courage to open it. "Hi Val," it read. "I hope this email finds you well. It's been a long time and I debated whether to reach out, but I wanted to let you know that Jennifer and I are moving to Seattle next month. I'm clearing out some old boxes and found a few things that belong to you, some jewelry, photos, that cookbook from your grandmother. If you'd like them back, I can drop them off somewhere neutral or mail them if you prefer. No pressure either way. Take care, Larry." Simple, polite, distant. The kind of email you might send to an old acquaintance, not someone you once planned to spend your life with. I read it 3 times, trying to decipher any hidden meaning before accepting it for what it was. A courtesy from someone who had moved on long ago. I typed and deleted 4 different responses before settling on something equally neutral. "Hi Larry, thanks for reaching out. I'd appreciate getting those things back. Mailing them would be perfect. I've moved too. I'm in Chicago now for work. I can send you my address. Hope all is well with you and your family. Best, Valencia." I hit send before I could overthink it further, then leaned back in my chair, feeling strangely unsettled. 5 years had passed. I had built a new life. I was in a healthy relationship with Eli, who had recently proposed. I had friends who knew the real me, not just the version I wanted them to see. I'd even reconciled with my parents, who had been surprised and grateful for my newfound honesty. Yet seeing Larry's name in my inbox had reopened something I thought had healed long ago. Later that night, I told Eli about the email. We were cooking dinner together, a routine we'd established early in our relationship. Unlike my time with Larry when I'd avoided domesticity and found excuses to be elsewhere, I now found comfort in these quiet moments of partnership. "Are you okay?" Eli asked, setting down the knife he was using to chop vegetables. "I think so," I said. "Just brought up some old feelings." "Regret?" he asked, his voice careful but not accusatory. I considered the question. "Not in the way you might think. I don't regret that Larry and I ended we needed to. I regret who I was with him, how I treated him." Eli nodded, understanding. He knew my history, the mistakes I'd made, the growth that followed. It was one of the things I loved most about him, his capacity to see people as works in progress, not defined solely by their worst moments. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. "Not really," I admitted. "But thank you for offering." He kissed my forehead and went back to chopping, respecting my space to process my own emotions. It was such a contrast to how I would have handled a similar situation in the past, either dismissing Eli's feelings or manufacturing drama to avoid real intimacy. The next morning, I received another email from Larry with Seattle details and a request for my address. I sent it along with a brief congratulations on the move. He responded with thanks and mentioned that Jennifer's company had offered her a fantastic opportunity they couldn't pass up. Sophia was 4 now and excited about her new room in their Seattle house. He attached a photo of a beaming little girl with his eyes and Jennifer's smile. I studied the photo, looking for signs of the life I might have had if I'd made different choices. But there was no point in that kind of thinking. Jennifer wasn't a placeholder for me in some alternate timeline. She was the right partner for Larry, the one who deserved his trust and built a family with him. 2 weeks later, a package arrived. Inside was a small jewelry box containing the earrings my grandmother had given me for college graduation, a few photographs from happier times, the cookbook as promised, and a birthday card from my parents that must have arrived after Larry left. No note, no message, just the items carefully wrapped. As I looked through the photos, I was struck by how young we seemed. In one, Larry and I were at a friend's wedding, his arm around my waist, my head thrown back in laughter. I remembered that night. I'd been texting Tyson under the table during dinner, making plans to meet up later that week while Larry was at a conference. Looking at my smiling face, you'd never know what was happening beneath the surface. I set the photos aside, feeling that familiar mix of shame and gratitude, shame for who I had been, gratitude for the painful lessons that had forced me to change. 6 years after Larry left, Eli and I got married in a small ceremony with just our closest friends and family. As we exchanged vows, I made silent promises beyond those I spoke aloud. To be honest, even when it's difficult. To respect both our relationship and myself. To never take for granted the trust being placed in me. My relationship with Eli was different from what I'd had with Larry in nearly every way. With Larry, I'd been constantly seeking excitement elsewhere, bored by stability, allergic to routine. With Eli, I found depth in our daily rhythms, comfort in our shared rituals, joy in building something lasting. The differences weren't just in how I behaved, but in how I felt. With Larry, I'd been so focused on maintaining the upper hand, on keeping him just insecure enough to try harder, that I'd never allowed myself to be truly vulnerable. With Eli, I'd learned that real intimacy comes from honesty, not just about facts and events, but about fears and flaws and feelings. On our honeymoon in Portugal, walking along the beach at sunset, Eli asked me a question I hadn't expected. "Do you ever wonder where Larry is now? What his life is like?" I looked out at the ocean, considering. Sometimes, I admitted. Not because I want to be back in that life, but because his leaving was such a turning point for me. I wonder if he knows that in forcing me to face myself, he changed the course of my life. Billy squeezed my hand. "Maybe someday you'll get a chance to tell him." I shook my head. "Some doors are better left closed. He's happy with his family. I'm happy with you. The past can stay in the past." 7 years after Larry left, I was promoted to creative director at the design agency where I'd been working since moving to Chicago. At the celebration dinner, my boss mentioned that we'd be partnering with a Seattle-based company for an upcoming project. They've got a brilliant logistics team, she said. Their operations manager will be coming to Chicago next month for initial meetings. A strange feeling came over me. What's the company called? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She named a firm I didn't recognize, and I felt both relieved and oddly disappointed. The connection would have been too coincidental, too contrived for real life. Larry and I inhabited different worlds now, linked only by the memory of a relationship that had ended long ago. That night I dreamed of the moment Larry had walked out the door. In my dream, as in reality, I begged him to stay, cycling through manipulation tactics that had always worked before. But unlike reality, in my dream I suddenly stopped, stepped back, and simply said, "I'm sorry, you deserve better." I woke with tears on my face and Eli's arm wrapped around me. He stirred half awake. "Bad dream?" he murmured. "Not bad," I whispered. "Just true." 8 years after Larry left, I found myself thinking about Tyson. Not with longing or curiosity, but with a kind of detached wonder at how important he had once seemed. I couldn't even remember the last time his name had crossed my mind. The man who had been worth risking my relationship, worth endless lies and manipulations, had faded to a vague memory, a cautionary tale I told myself about mistaking excitement for happiness. I wondered briefly what had become of him, then realized I didn't actually care. It wasn't callousness but closure. Tyson had been a symptom of my problems, not their cause. The real issue had been inside me, the constant need for validation, the fear of genuine intimacy, the belief that I could only be interesting if I was being deceptive. 9 years after Larry left, Eli and I welcomed our daughter Maya. Holding her for the first time, I felt a fierce protectiveness unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I wanted to shelter her from all pain, all disappointment, all hardship. But I also knew that wasn't possible or even desirable. Some lessons can only come through difficult experiences. As I rocked her late one night, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger, I made her silent promises. To be honest with her always. To show her through example, not just words, what integrity looks like. To help her learn from my mistakes without having to repeat them. You know what's strange? I said to Eli over breakfast a few weeks later, Maya asleep against my chest. I used to think being honest was this huge burden, this limitation. I lied to make my life easier, more exciting. But it was the opposite. The lies were the burden, the constant management of who knew what, the energy spent maintaining different versions of myself, the fear of being caught. Honesty is easier, harder in the moment sometimes, but easier in the long run. Billy looked at me over his coffee cup. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. Not everyone learns that lesson, even after being caught. 10 years after Larry left, I received an invitation to my college reunion. I hadn't kept in touch with many people from those days, but something made me want to go. Eli encouraged me, offering to stay home with Maya, now a toddler with her father's curiosity and my stubbornness. The campus was both familiar and strange, like revisiting a place from a dream. I wandered through buildings where I'd once attended classes, reminiscing about the person I'd been then, so certain of my own specialness, so unaware of how my actions affected others, so skilled at justifying my worst behaviors. At the main reception, I scanned the room out of habit, looking for familiar faces. And there he was, Tyson. Older, hair thinning, but with the same easy smile that had once seemed so irresistible. He was talking to a group of people, gesturing animatedly, clearly the center of attention as he had always preferred to be. For a moment, I considered avoiding him altogether. Then I decided to face this last ghost from my past. I approached the group, waiting for a break in the conversation. "Tyson," I said when he finally looked my way. "It's been a while." He stared at me blankly for a second before recognition dawned. "Val, wow, you look great. It's been what, 10 years?" "Something like that," I said. He made introductions to the group, describing me as an old friend from freshman year. No mention of our history, of the damage we'd caused together. Either he'd forgotten the details or, more likely, had rewritten the story in his mind to cast himself in a better light. The old me would have called him out, created a scene, demanded acknowledgement. The person I'd become simply accepted the introduction with a smile. We chatted briefly about careers, current cities, mutual acquaintances. He mentioned he was between relationships at the moment but enjoying the single life. I told him about Eli and Maya, showing him a photo on my phone. He made appropriate noises of admiration, then quickly steered the conversation back to himself. As I listened to him talk about his latest business venture, I felt nothing but a mild curiosity. No attraction, no resentment, not even dislike. Tyson had once been a central figure in the drama of my life, a catalyst for the worst choices I'd ever made. Now he was just a person at a reunion, no more significant than any other classmate reminiscing about college days. When I excused myself a few minutes later, he seemed mildly surprised, as if he'd expected me to be more captivated by his presence. I wished him well and meant it. As I walked away, I felt the last link to my old self finally break free. Later that night in my hotel room, I called Eli to say goodnight. We talked about the reunion, about Maya's day, about ordinary things that made up our life together. As I was about to hang up, I said, "I ran into Tyson tonight." A pause. "How was that?" Eli asked carefully. "Anticlimactic," I said. "Like meeting a stranger who happens to know some of the same people you do." I kept waiting to feel something: guilt, anger, attraction, anything. But there was nothing there. "That's a good thing, right?" "It's a great thing," I said. "It means I've truly moved on, not just from him specifically, but from who I was when I was with him." When I returned home the next day, Eli and Maya were waiting at the airport. My daughter ran to me, arms outstretched, squealing with delight. My husband watched us with a smile that still made my heart skip after all these years. As we drove home, Maya chattering about everything I'd missed in my 2 days away, I thought about the parallel lives we all lead, the actual one we're living and the many possible ones that branch off from each decision we make. Somewhere there was a Valencia who had never cheated on Larry, who had built a life with him instead of driving him away. Somewhere there was a Valencia who had never been caught, who had continued her patterns of deception indefinitely, growing more skilled at lying but never at living honestly. And then there was me, the Valencia who had made terrible mistakes, faced painful consequences, and slowly, imperfectly, learned to be better. Not because I was inherently good or wise, but because losing Larry had forced me to see myself clearly for the first time. That night, after putting Maya to bed, I sat on our back porch with Eli, watching fireflies blink in the summer darkness. He took my hand, a gesture so familiar it had become almost unconscious between us. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. I smiled at the phrase, one of his father's that he'd adopted. "I was thinking about Larry, actually." He waited, giving me space to continue. 10 years ago today, he walked out. It felt like the worst thing that could have happened to me at the time. I was so angry, so hurt that he wouldn't give me another chance. But it was actually the best thing anyone has ever done for me. "Because it forced you to change," Eli said. "Exactly. If he had stayed, if he had forgiven me too easily, I would never have had to face who I really was. I would have learned that I could get away with anything, that there were no real consequences for hurting people who loved me." Eli squeezed my hand. "Everything that brought you to this moment, to us, to Maya, I can't regret any of it." "Neither can I said, meaning it completely. 10 years after calling Larry insecure for having perfectly reasonable boundaries, after laughing in his face when he asked me to block the man I was cheating with, after watching him walk out the door with quiet dignity while I alternated between threats and pleas, I had become someone almost unrecognizable to my former self. Not perfect, not without flaws or regrets or moments of weakness, but someone who understood that integrity isn't about never making mistakes, it's about owning them when you do. Someone who had learned that real connection comes from vulnerability, not manipulation. Someone who had discovered, finally, that honesty isn't just an obligation to others but a gift to yourself. Larry deserved the credit for starting me on this path, even though he never intended to. In refusing to accept my lies, in walking away rather than staying to be mistreated, he had given me the gift of consequences. It had taken years for me to fully appreciate that gift, to recognize that his departure wasn't an act of cruelty but of self-respect. I hoped, wherever he was, that he was happy, that his daughter was growing up strong and kind, that his marriage was built on the trust and honesty he had always deserved but never received from me. I no longer needed to know these things for cert, no longer felt entitled to information about his life. I simply wished them for him, with genuine goodwill and without expectation. The Valencia who had called him insecure as he packed his bags would never have understood this feeling. But I was no longer that Valencia. I was someone new, someone better, precisely because he had found the strength to walk away. 15 years after Larry left, I found myself back in our old city for a business conference. Maya was 10 now, a thoughtful, spirited girl with Eli's easy laugh and my determination. Eli had stayed home with her for the week while I represented our design firm at the industry event. The conference center was just blocks from the apartment Larry and I had once shared. I hadn't been back to this neighborhood since I'd moved away, and I felt a strange compulsion to see it again. After the day's sessions ended, I decided to walk by, not out of nostalgia, but as a kind of personal ritual, a measuring of distance traveled. The building looked smaller than I remembered, less significant. I stood across the street, expecting to feel something profound, but what struck me most was how little emotion the place stirred in me now. It was just a building where I had once lived, where a pivotal moment in my life had occurred. The pain, the drama, the desperation of that night had faded to a dull memory, important but no longer raw. As I turned to leave, I spotted a familiar figure exiting the coffee shop next door. Larry. He was older, of course, with touches of gray at his temples, but unmistakable. He was talking to a teenage girl who had to be Sophia, now 15, tall and self-possessed. Beside them was a boy of about 8 or 9, clearly their son, bouncing with energy as he sipped from a paper cup. I froze, unsure whether to approach or slip away unnoticed. Before I could decide, Larry looked up and saw me. His expression changed from surprise to something unreadable. He said something to his children and they all crossed the street toward me. Valencia, he said, his voice neither warm nor cold, simply acknowledging. Larry, I replied. What a coincidence. An awkward silence fell. Sophia studied me with curious eyes, clearly wondering who this woman was that had caused such a shift in her father's demeanor. These are my children, Larry said finally. Sophia and James. Kids, this is Valencia. She's an old friend, not ex-girlfriend, not the woman who had betrayed him, not someone he once thought he'd spend his life with. Just a friend, a sanitized version of our history suitable for his children's ears. I found myself grateful for the kindness of this small fiction. Nice to meet you, I said to the children, who murmured polite greetings in return. Are you visiting? Larry asked, making conversation as one would with any acquaintance. Business conference, I explained. I was just taking a walk and realized I was near our old building. A flicker of something crossed his face at the word our, but he smoothed it away quickly. We're visiting my sister, he said. She still lives in the area. How's Jennifer? I asked, genuinely wanting to know. She's good, he said, a small smile appearing at the mention of his wife. She's at a work dinner tonight, so I'm on kid duty. More stilted conversation followed. I learned they still lived in Seattle, that Sophia was a talented violinist, that James was obsessed with space exploration. Normal, pleasant facts exchanged between people with a distant connection. Nothing about how he'd felt when he walked out that night, nothing about the years that followed, nothing about how his life had been shaped by the decision to leave. We should get going, Larry said after a few minutes. We're meeting Megan for dinner. Of course, I said. It was nice to see you, all of you. As they turned to leave, Sophia looked back at me with that same curious expression. Were you and Dad close? She asked, ignoring her father's slight frown. I considered my answer carefully. We were a long time ago, I said. Before he met your mom. She nodded, apparently satisfied with this sparse explanation. Larry gave me a nod of acknowledgement, perhaps appreciation for not complicating his daughter's understanding of the past. Take care, Val, he said, the old nickname slipping out perhaps unconsciously. You too, Larry, I replied. I watched them walk away, this family that could have included me in some alternate version of my life. But that version would have required a completely different Valencia, one who didn't exist 15 years ago. And if that Valencia had existed, would she have appreciated what she had? Or would she have taken it for granted, never learning the hard lessons that had shaped who I'd become? Back in my hotel room, I called Eli, finding comfort in his familiar voice. I told him about running into Larry and his children, about the strange surreality of seeing this glimpse of a life that had continued without me. Are you okay? He asked, the same question he'd asked 10 years earlier when Larry's email had arrived. I am, I said, realizing it was completely true. It was like running into a character from a book I read long ago. I recognize them, I remember their story, but it doesn't feel like my story anymore. That's growth, Eli said. Being able to acknowledge the past without being defined by it. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself thinking not about Larry specifically, but about forgiveness. Not Larry's forgiveness of me, I had stopped expecting or feeling entitled to that years ago, but my own forgiveness of myself. For so long, I had used my past mistakes as a kind of club to beat myself with, a constant reminder of who I had been and who I must never become again. But seeing Larry today, seeing how completely he had moved on with his life, made me wonder if it was time to fully release the past, not to forget it or deny it, but to stop defining myself in opposition to it. The Valencia who had laughed in Larry's face as he packed to leave would always be a part of me, a shadow version I was determined never to become again. But she was no longer the central reference point of my identity. I had built something new, something genuine and worthwhile in the years since that night. 20 years after Larry left, Maya graduated from high school. As we watched her cross the stage in her cap and gown, I felt that familiar mix of pride and wistfulness that seems to define parenthood, joy at who she was becoming, nostalgia for who she had been. At the celebration dinner afterward, Maya pulled out an envelope and handed it to Eli and me. Inside was her college acceptance letter. She'd been offered a scholarship to study engineering at a prestigious university. I have a confession, she said, her expression suddenly serious. I applied without telling you because I wasn't sure I'd get in. I didn't want you to be disappointed if I failed. I felt a pang of recognition in those words. How many times had I hidden things, not out of malice but out of fear? How many times had I chosen deception over vulnerability? Maya, I said carefully, we could never be disappointed in you for trying something challenging and not succeeding. The only failure would be in not being honest with us or with yourself. She nodded, relief clear on her face. I know that logically, I just got scared. Fear makes us do strange things, Eli said, squeezing her hand. But secrets have a way of becoming burdens. Trust is always better. As I listened to my husband's gentle wisdom, I thought about how different Maya's upbringing had been from my own. We had taught her that mistakes were expected, that honesty was valued above achievement, that being authentic was more important than being perfect. It wasn't a perfect antidote to the human tendency toward self-protection, but it was a foundation I wished I'd had. Later that night, as Eli and I sat on our back porch, a tradition we'd maintained through the years, I found myself reflecting on the long arc of my life since that pivotal night. I was thinking about Larry today, I said. Eli nodded, unsurprised. Major life events often triggered these reflections for me, though they came less frequently now. 20 years, I said. Half my life ago now. It's strange how one moment can divide your life so cleanly into before and after. Do you still regret it? Eli asked, what happened between you two? I considered the question carefully. I regret hurting him, I said finally. I regret who I was then, but I can't regret how things turned out. If Larry hadn't walked out that night, I might never have faced myself honestly. I might never have become someone capable of what we've built together. The painful moments shape us as much as the joyful ones, Eli said. Sometimes more. 25 years after Larry left, I published my first book. Not a memoir, I had no interest in recounting my past mistakes for public consumption, but a design guide highlighting my professional work. At the book signing event, I was surprised by how many people showed up, how many lives had been touched in some way by my creative efforts. As I signed copy after copy, I couldn't help but think about the long, winding path that had led me here. How the worst night of my life had ultimately set me on a course toward something meaningful. How losing what I thought I wanted had created space for what I truly needed. When I got home that night, there was an email waiting for me. The sender's name made me pause, Lawrence Matthews. With a sense of déjà vu, I clicked it open. Hi Valencia, it read. I hope this message finds you well. I saw an article about your book release and wanted to congratulate you. It looks like you've built an impressive career. I'm glad things worked out for you. Best wishes, Larry. Simple, straightforward, kind. Not the message of someone harboring resentment or pain, but of someone who had genuinely moved on. I sat with the email for a long time, considering how to respond. Finally, I typed, "Thank you, Larry. That means a lot coming from you. I've thought about you over the years and hoped you were happy. It seems you are, which makes me glad. I want you to know that while I can never undo the pain I caused, the person I've become is largely because of the stand you took that night." Walking away from someone who treats you badly is an act of self-respect that ultimately forced me to face myself honestly. I'm grateful for that hard lesson, even though I wish I hadn't made it necessary. Wishing you and your family all the best, Valencia. I hesitated before hitting send, uncertain if this was crossing a boundary. But after 25 years, perhaps we were both healed enough for this small exchange of goodwill. I sent the email and closed my laptop, not expecting a response. To my surprise, one came the next morning. Valencia, thank you for your message. Life takes unexpected turns, doesn't it? We're both where we're meant to be now, I think. I appreciate your words more than you know. Larry, and that was it. Not a rekindling of any kind, not an opening to further communication, just an acknowledgement between two people whose lives had briefly, significantly intersected long ago. It was enough. It was closure of the healthiest kind. 30 years after Larry left, Eli and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. Maya was married now with a child of her own, making us first-time grandparents to a beautiful little boy. As we gathered for a family dinner to mark the occasion, I looked around the table at the life we had built, the relationships founded on honesty and respect, the love that had grown steadier and deeper with time. During the dinner, Maya raised her glass for a toast. To my parents, she said, who taught me what real partnership looks like, who showed me that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments, but about choosing each other every day, especially when it's difficult. As everyone clinked glasses, I caught Eli's eye across the table. In that look was 30 years of shared history, the joys and sorrows, the conflicts and reconciliations, the mundane Tuesdays and milestone celebrations. A life built one honest choice at a time. Later, as we drove home, Eli asked, "What are you thinking about? You've got that reflective look." "I was thinking about Larry," I admitted. "Ah," he said, not surprised or bothered after all these years of understanding what Larry's departure had meant to my development. "What about him specifically?" "Just that I hope he has this," I said, gesturing between us. "This kind of partnership, this honesty. He deserved it then and he deserves it now." "I'm sure he does," Eli said. People who know their own worth tend to find what they deserve eventually. 35 years after Larry left, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. The prognosis was good, they had caught it early, but the treatment would be difficult. As Eli and I sat in the doctor's office absorbing the news, I felt a strange sense of calm. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I knew I wouldn't face this challenge alone or with false bravado. Throughout the months of treatment that followed, I allowed myself to be vulnerable in ways the younger me would have found impossible. I let Eli see my fear, my weakness, my frustration. I accepted help not just from him, but from Maya, from friends, from colleagues. I didn't pretend to be stronger than I was or hide the difficult moments. It was during my recovery, as I sat in our garden watching butterflies visit the flowers Eli had planted for me, that I reflected on how different my response to this crisis was from how I would have handled it in my 20s. Back then, I would have hidden my fear behind a mask of cool detachment. I would have pushed away those trying to help, seeing their concern as a threat to my carefully constructed image. I would have exhausted myself maintaining the facade of someone unaffected by pain or uncertainty. The growth from that person to who I had become wasn't a straight line. It had been a winding path of progress and backsliding, of insights gained and sometimes forgotten, of old habits dying slowly rather than all at once. But sitting there in the garden, I could see how far I had traveled from the woman who had called Larry insecure for wanting basic honesty and respect. 40 years after Larry left, I found myself thinking about him less and less. Not because the lessons of that time had diminished in importance, but because they had been so thoroughly integrated into who I had become that they no longer required conscious reflection. The pain of that night, once so vivid and defining, had faded to a dull memory, important but no longer raw, and I had settled into a comfortable retirement. Maya visited often with her family. We traveled, volunteered, pursued interests we put aside during our working years. Life had taken on a gentle rhythm, less urgent but no less meaningful. It was during a trip to visit old friends that I saw the notice in the local paper. Lawrence Matthews, aged 73, had passed away after a brief illness. He was survived by his wife of 41 years, Jennifer, their 2 children, Sophia and James, and 4 grandchildren. The obituary described him as a devoted family man, a respected professional, and a person of integrity who would be deeply missed by all who knew him. I sat with the paper in my hands, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for a life ended too soon. Gratitude for the inadvertent gift he had given me by walking away. A strange sense of loss for someone who had been absent from my life for 4 decades. I didn't attend the funeral. It wasn't my place. But I sent flowers with a simple card, with deepest sympathy. His integrity changed my life, Valencia. A week later, I received a note from Jennifer. "Thank you for your flowers," she wrote. "Larry spoke of you occasionally over the years, always with the recognition that difficult endings sometimes lead to better beginnings. I believe he would appreciate knowing that something positive came from that chapter of his life. Wishing you well, Jennifer." I showed the note to Eli that evening. "She seems kind," he said. "I'm glad Larry found someone like that." "Me too," I said, and meant it completely. As I placed the note in my desk drawer, I thought about the strange interconnectedness of our lives, how one person's choice can alter another's path so profoundly. Larry's decision to walk out that night had set in motion a chain of events that led me to this moment, to this life I would never have been capable of building without that painful lesson. I thought about the Valencia of 40 years ago, so convinced of her own cleverness, so skilled at manipulation, so incapable of genuine connection. I felt compassion for her now rather than shame. She had been protecting herself in the only ways she knew how, filling her emptiness with the hollow thrill of deception. And I thought about Larry, a man I had once underestimated so completely, whose quiet dignity had ultimately taught me more than years of therapy or self-help books ever could. He had shown me that integrity isn't just a nice concept but a practice, a choice made again and again in moments large and small. In walking away from someone who treated him poorly, he had given me the opportunity to become someone who wouldn't treat others that way. It wasn't the lesson he'd intended to teach, perhaps, but it was the one I'd needed most to learn. The night he told me to block my best friend and I called him insecure, I thought I was winning, maintaining the upper hand, keeping my options open. I couldn't see that I was actually losing everything that mattered, not just Larry, but my chance at authentic connection, at genuine self-respect, at a life built on truth rather than convenience. It had taken years to fully understand what happened that night, to recognize that when Larry packed his bags and left, he wasn't being dramatic or punitive. He was simply showing me who he was, someone who valued himself enough to walk away from mistreatment, who understood that love without respect is just another form of manipulation. In his quiet dignity, in his refusal to accept less than he deserved, Larry had shown me a different way to be. It had taken me 40 years to fully integrate that lesson, to become someone who could be honest even when it was difficult, vulnerable even when it was frightening, accountable even when it was painful. The Valencia who had laughed in Larry's face that night would never have believed she could become this person. But looking back across the decades, I could see how each small choice to be honest rather than expedient, vulnerable rather than defensive, accountable rather than evasive, had gradually transformed me into someone almost unrecognizable to my younger self. Not perfect, not without regrets or mistakes, but someone who had learned, finally, that integrity isn't a burden but a liberation. Someone who had discovered that real connection comes not from controlling others, but from allowing yourself to be truly known. Someone who had found that honesty, though sometimes painful in the moment, creates the foundation for genuine intimacy, for lasting relationships, for a life of meaning rather than mere excitement. As I closed the drawer on Jennifer's note, I silently thanked Larry one last time, not for leaving, but for showing me who I needed to become. For giving me, in his absence, the chance to find myself. For teaching me, through his quiet dignity, that some lessons can only be learned when we lose what we thought we wanted and find, in that loss, what we truly needed all along.